hoping to do is be able to turn the mics off, and then they could hear the monitors right now. I can hold them down, right? Yeah, it doesn't turn them on there. Yeah, it'll stay on. This is whenever you turn
take it out of audition.
Yeah, you can leave them all on. Okay, leave that on there. When they call it on the phone, you can still you'll still be able to hear it. Okay. We'll see if it works, right? Yeah, make a call because I got my phone charging right now. You had it set at 7, so automatically came in. I didn't have to hit the button, right? Because it was still on auto. It was on auto. Okay. Not live assist. Did it came on automatically? You didn't touch that then? You didn't touch it? Yeah. Okay. So what do we do? You want me to call? Yeah, real quick. Test. The only thing is, we're going to do this. Now go ahead. I hung it already. Okay. We should be good. I'm pretty sure we'll be good. Yeah. Just so you don't get the echo. Yeah. That goes there. Okay. We're ready. Unless you want to leave them, we'll leave them on if you want to. Okay. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. All right. You're in that t-shirt today. Huh? You're in that t-shirt today. Nah, I don't mind. Yeah. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, so you tell me how to talk about it. Yeah, we'll talk about it. No, Dad not started that. Yeah, started YouTube. Let's start. I'll start. I'm gonna do laughs. Do you go around? That's nice. Just don't trip. I like it when Victor talks white guy. I think that we should get Victor to come on and talk white guy, and I'll go, okay, that's it. I'll talk Hispanic dude. Hey, where's your headphones? I gave them to you. I got him. Victor's got me. Thank God for Victor. Victor, I got you a t-shirt now. He's trying to get another one. He said you're in today. Just my side. Yeah, that's okay. As long as they're down, they're not on. It's bent. It's like it's real now. It is real. Yeah. Coming up on this morning's show, we'll talk bond, and we'll talk VISD bond, and we'll talk VISD bond. All that and bond coming up on today's Wade and Carter show. School district gets an Aston Martin DB9 bond. I like that one. We can hear it. Hey, when we get them in there, get them situated, will you just kind of turn that so they can get a little FaceTime? Where do we? Whichever one, and whichever one you want. Hey, good morning. Hey, good morning to you, Ash. How are you this morning? I'm good. I feel like I've been summoned to the principal's office. You know, kind of. A little bit, kind of. But I feel good about it. Good. I'm glad. I didn't do whatever it is they're accusing me of. You probably did. Probably. Let's be honest. It could happen that way. Let's do this. The folks at Wade and Carter Weather is brought to you by Deerland Feed. For over 50 years, they've been over there in that beautiful old gin building. 51. Swilling gin, selling seeds, chickens. What else, Ash? Weed killer, fertilizer. Everything. Ducks every once in a while. Everything for your cattle, your swine, your equine, hay. They've got it all. Seed potatoes right now, they're hot. They're going. So today's a great day there. It's 63 degrees in Victoria. It's clear. Going to be sunny day to a high of 81. 63 to 81. Dead of winter. I was visiting with Dr. Shepard in the green room. It's not over, though. We're going to get a couple days next week looking at the long-range forecast. We're going to be in the low 30s
upper 20s.
Dr. Shepard and Dr. Bonewald were over there having a very dry but a little dirty martini up in the green room. They were talking about bond, school bond. Having a teeny, trying to get lubed up, loosened a little bit to take your calls and questions here at the Wade and Carter program. But very exciting. I was asking Dr. Shepard, who grew up in Iowa. I mean, like, it's a place where you don't shovel snow. You just give up for a couple of months. The corn has been harvested. The pheasant have been shot. And you just wait for the snow to melt so you can go help Daddy plant.
Well, you stay there and you keep your sights on that one dumb rabbit who's stupid enough to put his head up so you can make stew in the middle of winter.
Right. Okay, I have nowhere to go with that, but I'll tell you this, Dr. Shepard.
I'm just telling you, that's the reality of winters.
Dr. Shepard acknowledged that being in Victoria, Texas in the dead of winter was not his worst Call of Duty ever.
No kidding.
So you've got that going for you. There's Roy Gutierrez. Say it for me.
Lisa Poole.
Roy who?
Gutierrez.
Oh, you're so white.
Bobby Leister's in this morning. Lisa Poole's first in. Gets you nothing this morning, Lisa.
Lisa Poole, longtime retired school teacher. Good one. David Glass, the Iceman, Justin Sikorsky, Chris Conrad.
Missy Madden Klimacek, good morning.
Dr. Missy Madden Klimacek. Y'all know Dr. Klimacek. She's a sweetheart. Bobby Leister, 740 people on YouTube.
We lost 2 Russians, according to the Leisterometer this morning. Those dang bots have bailed on us. Justin Glass, good morning. Terry Murray's checking in. Patrick Strauss, Judge Posey, Richard King.
Good morning, Judge. We don't cuss the bots that sign on as YouTube accounts because they're the same. We can't embrace them and still talk bad about Joe Biden's voters. The 81 million or the 40 million plus the 41 million robots that voted for Joe Biden.
Kerry Bump, good morning. Daniel White is checking in. Christina Wise checking in from the ATX. Marvin Mickish, good morning. Sheriff Louderback. Diane
good morning,
Tippett,
Sheriff.
And I think we're pretty much caught up.
There was Kerry Bump. It used to be Charbula, Kerry Bump.
I say Kerry Bump.
She's Terry Murray.
So I think we're in pretty good shape this morning. So do you want to jump right into the bond and bring Dr. Shepard and Dr. Bonewald in and give them an opportunity to?
I've been listening to you for almost 5 years now, and I can't think of anything you have to say that could be more important. Now, if they want me to just pontificate for a while, I can.
Yeah, we don't want that.
Right. I think we should
want people to tune in.
Here's what I want to do. I'm going to turn the mics up.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that you do want to talk directly into it. It's almost if you're not uncomfortable, you're not close enough.
Fair enough.
Fair enough.
That is fair enough.
And it has been sterilized for real. And we sprayed them down. And I'm very excited to introduce, if you're looking at your screen on your left, is Dr. Quentin Shepard. He's our superintendent of schools. And Dr. Gregory Bonewald, who I would say is our assistant superintendent. Is that the
Deputy.
He's
deputy.
It's the guy that really does the work. He's the guy.
Other duties.
He's been given one. He's been given one bullet.
Right. He's got the one bullet, but Dr. Shepard doesn't even wear a gun. So there you have it. It's Mayberry all over again. Gentlemen, welcome. I've been privileged, I feel, to know both of you while serving on a task force and away from this. And personally, I think you're both incredibly wonderful individuals. And I think together you're a formidable team for the children and the school district. We're very, very pleased and proud to have you on our program. I mean that with all the humor that we like to inject, your availability, your willingness to come on the program, and your commitment to our kids means the world to me personally. So thank you and welcome to the program. There you go. Right now, I'm going to give you this. Right now is a great time to go, thanks for having us, and walk out the door. I mean, we can wrap it up. We can go home early. We can all go to work. But no, take a minute, either together or feed off each other, and just tell us where we're at. Tell us where you want us to be.
Sure.
And let's just go from there.
I'll go ahead and start and kind of talk overarching, and then I'll turn it over to Greg to talk some of the maybe details about the bond for the listeners who haven't heard about it. So when I came to the district 3 years ago, I engaged in a listening and learning tour for about 100 days. And that was just me out in the community asking a very simple question. What would you have me do? What would you have me focus on? And through that opportunity, there were several themes that emerged. But one of the themes that came up that I heard from everybody, almost to a person, was the recognition that our schools have some needs when it comes to the facilities. There's no denying that fact. Anyone who's ever spent any time in our buildings recognizes that the needs are there. But to the same end, the folks would also say to me, we want more ownership in the process. We want to have some input. We want to be able to say what projects get done and to what degree, and we want to feel like we're a part of it. And so I took that to heart. After that, we engaged in a strategic planning process. We felt like it was a good time to refresh the strategic plan. We had thousands of people involved in this. Really, if you count up the aggregate total between what we did online and in person, over about 10,000 people participated in some way, shape, or form. And out of that came some recommendations for buildings and facilities, but also out of that came some really high goals for student learning and what student learning looks like. And amongst those, the ones that I like to really talk about, because I get so passionate about it, are these pathways for student learning. So we want to design this STEM pathway for our kiddos, starting in elementary school through middle school and all the way up to high school, and give access to any child who lives in Victoria to be able to access that programming. We also want to build project-based learning pathways. So we've gone out and done our due diligence. We've been able to garner so far about $9 million in state grant funding to support those programs. So we're actively building those out as we speak. We've also written for another $14 million for curricular programming that would come from federal governments, much like the magnet program that used to exist here in Victoria, and I know is very popular. That was another thing I heard from the listening and learning tours. These folks wanted to see something like that come back. And so we tried to then marry the strategic planning ideas that we have for student learning with the building and facilities needs. And then about 16 months ago, we kicked off a task force. We had done an efficiency and resource management task force, cut through the programs and looked at absolutely everything, turned over every stone we could to maximize our efficiency and recognize that we needed to do everything we could to be responsible stewards of the taxpayer dollars. And then we kicked off this bottom planning task force to look at possible scenarios for that. And I'll turn it over to Greg.
Well, I'd like to start, Brett. You mentioned that you were a part of really that first task force that we had, the efficiency of resource management. So you have some semblance of an idea of what that work looks like in general with the school district, with the community. And that was a great group to kick us off. And we had some members of that group who are still with us today and have served on multiple task forces. So I want to start by just expressing a huge amount of gratitude to those community members. We had, over the course of that 16 months that Dr. Shepard talked about, we had about 50 people involved in the process. And as you can imagine, 16 months, starting pre-COVID, pre-virtual, we were meeting in person back in September of 2019. We ended that 16-month journey with 32 people as a part of our task force. You're talking parents, grandparents, community members, business owners, and staff. And so that group has dedicated about 40 hours of concentrated work time looking at every aspect of our district as it relates to facilities and a potential bond recommendation. We're talking about starting out by looking at where we are in our financial overview as a district, looking at our demographic study that was conducted last year, projecting enrollment out for the next decade. They went on physical tours and looked at some of our newer facilities and compared to some of our facilities that are 6-7 decades old, looking at the equitable opportunities for students or lack thereof in some cases. They've done virtual tours when we could no longer go out in person. They talked about the strategic plan and the pathways and those innovative designs, and that's part of what led to some of the recommendation I'll speak to in a second. One of the biggest eye-openers is they looked at construction data, and they looked at the rising cost of construction data. And they talked about, when we've built schools in the past and what that might have cost and what projects to cost to build schools today. That's an eye-opener for all of us. They also talked about the cost of waiting and what that would mean to our older facilities if we don't do something in the near future in terms of those costs. They went beyond that and they looked at, for our older facilities, what does it look like for renovation versus repair? What's the cost benefit analysis of renovating versus completely replacing a building that's 60 or 70 years old? And they looked at bond capacity. They looked at the impact to the taxpayer. They looked at various levels, various scenarios. What would that cost for our community? Trying to bring something forward that addresses needs that exist today within a reasonable amount to the taxpayer.
Well, it was worth noting that those folks are taxpayers. I mean, the people that were saying, hey, yeah, we've got to do something are the people whose checkbook will be affected. I can remember going on the tours and listening to folks on the buses saying, man, kids ride this every day, and saying, I haven't been on a bus in 40 years, some of them. And, if you haven't been on a yellow dog,
Technology hasn't changed much in yellow dogs.
No, the yellow dog is still just a bread box on a chassis. And when you get on it, but we went out and went to Wood High, and we went to Gross, and we went to Guadalupe, and the thing that overwhelmed all of us, and it's a compliment to y'all, but it is also a compliment to prior administrations, is that at each school we were overwhelmed by the greeting that we got, by the unbelievable, I don't know if you're like giving them like Adderall in the morning, what you call it, but the unbelievable excited attitude of the educators. It was not a front. They were like, come on in. I can't wait to show you my school. And the kids would wave. And these are the people we told y'all about. Are you in your places? And they were all in their chairs, and they would wave, hi. And I was really, especially Gross, really grabbed me by the heart. And the same thing at Guadalupe was just unbelievable, the reception we got. So, I can go back in my head to that and know that task force has evolved and moved forward, and you live in a fluid situation. I know that we have kids back at Gross now, don't we, in some capacity?
Well, we're starting to bring kids back to Gross. We've scored what we think is one of the coolest things that you could possibly imagine, and that's to forge an 1882 partnership with UT Austin. Now, they do what's called the Children's Learning Institute, which is the premier program in Texas, and frankly, through the southern part of the United States. And we reached out to them and said, we want to look at FW Gross as like an early childhood center, and we want a partner who can come in and make it, just the coolest thing you've ever seen, the best opportunity for kids that you could possibly imagine. And they were willing to come to the table. So this is the first time UT Austin has formed an agreement with a public school. It's here in Victoria.
And it's one of those things that you don't, and again, maybe we should have you on the air more often, but it's a thing you don't get an attaboy for. It's a thing that didn't cost the taxpayers money. It's a thing that's a cooperative effort with the flagship university in the state. And you've done all that to the benefit of the children while keeping kids. I remember the passion of the Gross area neighborhood saying, we love our school. And there you go. There you have it. And, that's a success story that you guys, I know you're so busy doing it, you don't have time to talk about it, but you need a champion that says, hey, we're making things happen for these kids. So take us through the next 20 years. What are we going to do? How are we going to grow, and where do we go?
And how did you prioritize, I guess, maybe from that process that you talked about with the community, how did you get to the projects that have, gotten to this bond? I guess at least if we can answer that in probably a two-part question.
So if we go back to the fall of 2019, we started there with a facilities assessment. And so we had a facilities assessment conducted of all of our older facilities, every facility that wasn't built as a part of the 2007 bond. And so we're talking about over thousands of pages of data based on each of those facilities. And so the task force had access to this information. In fact, our entire community has access to this information on our bond planning website at visd.net. So anyone can see all the results of that facility assessment. But from that, with our administrative leadership team and the task force, we worked together to identify priority repair items first. So looking at each of these campuses, just doing what we consider the basics that we ought to offer in any type of building, this one or a school: consistent HVAC, plumbing systems that work, electrical systems that can handle the capacity of offering education today, safety and security, accessibility, all those types of elements that are basic elements of a school building were considered. And then we looked at what would the cost be to address those at each of those aging facilities. And then there started to be the conversation around cost benefit analysis. And so I'll use Stroman as an example. When you looked at those basic infrastructure on a building of its condition and age, you were talking about repairs of over $23 million, estimated over $23 million. And so then the conversation was, Does that make sense? You're not changing anything about the learning environment of a school district or a school campus that's very old. Is that the best use of taxpayer money? Or are we better served to look at potential rebuild of that facility? And so I want to clarify that, because as we put this information out there, when we use that term rebuild, some have thought that meant renovate, go in with the existing structure and, do some renovation. No, we're talking about demolition and rebuild of a new campus at that site. That's part of the recommendation of the task force. Similarly, Mission Valley Elementary was identified. Mission Valley is our oldest school by far. The core facility is 84 years old. The remainder of the facility, over 30-year-old portable buildings. And so as our task force walked through the prioritization process of campuses and looked at those cost-benefit analysis, those two campuses rose to the top. And there were other campuses that were given serious consideration, because if you look at that one pager I gave you, you'll recognize we have 15 campuses, core facilities over 50 years old, 10 campuses, core facilities over 60. So from those prioritizations, they identified Stroman and Mission Valley as the two to bring forward to the board to recommend for a complete rebuild. And then they identified those priority repair items at many campuses across the district to extend the life of those buildings. And then lastly, they identified an area of concern, and this came from our task force. This wasn't something the district brought to the community. This is something the community group and the task force brought to us, of providing equitable, accessible playgrounds at all of our elementary schools. So that's also a part of this bottom recommendation. And one thing that I want to point out about the recommendations, at the very beginning of this process, back in September of 2019, this group set their own bar for what consensus meant to bring forward any of these recommendations that you see. And they set a much higher bar than the average school task force and other school districts do. They set a bar that no more than 4 members of the group could say, yeah, I don't know about that part of the plan. That meant almost 90% had to say, we're all in on this part of the recommendation.
Right. You'll see lots of things where if there's a majority, 50% plus one, say, yeah, let's do it. Well, then we move forward. You got a group that studied this intently from all different walks of Victoria, from all different economic, socioeconomic, and financial, and all these different positions. All at worst, 3 or 4 of them said, I don't know about that. But in general, that's a 90% plus consensus that let's move forward.
Right around 90%.
Okay.
It's usually more about 2/3.
Right. Well, good job.
If you have questions, give us a call, 575-9509, or you can post them on Facebook or on the YouTube channel as well, and we'll take them.
I have a question.
Read them. Yes.
How do you?
Are you going to call in, or are you just going to type
I
it
could
on Facebook?
call. I've got my phone. How do you? When I look at Stroman, and I say in stereotype, and I could be wrong with the demographics, or where the people actually are. My mind says, hey, Victoria's growing north and west. Why do you want to spend $75 million at Stroman? Is it just because you already own the land? Is it the thought that that's going to help rejuvenate a neighborhood? Is it all of the above? Why Stroman? Why not out off 77 North where all the people are? I'm speaking in stereotype for a group of people.
Well, the answer is all of the above. You touched on some of the things. The other part to it is, as I said earlier, we've written some very specific grants around these different schools. So we've targeted both Stroman and Patty Weller as our 2 campuses, middle school campuses, that we want to essentially turn into what the community might remember as these magnet schools. That would be open for all. And given that we have the space, the footprint, if you will, the land right there, absolutely, it just seems like that's the right place to do it. It's the way that Greg and I talk about this a lot. It was the mindset that we went into this process with. It's the mindset that we try to manage the district with, which is we want to be remembered for outsmarting a problem and not just outspending it. Anybody can outspend a problem, right? And I think that's the way many school districts operate. They just think we'll raise taxes and no big deal. Our mantra is let's be responsible with the taxpayers and economize every dollar.
And I would just want to add to that point. We had a previous task force that looked at our school boundaries because they hadn't been adjusted in about a decade. And we do recognize there is some growth to the north side of Victoria, but I have the benefit of the access to the actual data and seeing it in a scatter plot, and you look at Victoria, we're actually very densely populated in a fairly small area for about 85% of our student body. So while we feel the effects because we see the new homes being built in the north side of town, when you actually look at where all the students live, they're quite centralized within a pretty tight
There you go.
area.
And I like it. It is.
So it's more perception than reality.
That's exactly right.
But is it perception reality? At any rate, I digress. I did.
It's another conversation.
It is worth noting that, because it was my idea too, to say, hey, well, why don't you just take Patty Welder, instead of spending $75 million at Stroman, spend $100 million. Now you get rid of Patty Welder, which, because by the way, let's say Patty Welder is costing you $500,000 a year to maintain. That's $10 million in maintenance over the next 20 years. Just put that money into Stroman. Let's build a big junior high and let's roll on. And then the realities of the folks that are offering grant money, the free money, the non-tax revenue money, those folks have very specific guidelines that don't involve your junior high plan.
That's absolutely right.
So you have to look at the net cost, which it may be cheaper to maintain PW and take the grant money than it is just to go build a building on your own. And that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
We do have a question. Why has our school board allowed these schools to deteriorate for so long
Great question.
to get to the point where we are now?
Again, this is I love these types of questions. So thanks to the listener or viewer who asked that, because this is one of the things that Greg and I are committed to. It's radical transparency, which we actually define. Radical transparency for us is just unprecedented levels of accessibility to both information and people. So this question is actually something we've heard a lot in the community, a lot from many, many people. I want for Greg to have the opportunity to answer that with sort of the truth.
Yeah, well, it's always nice to bring some data to the conversation. And so one of the things that we learned and shared with the task force as they were considering this whole process was we analyzed our budget. We analyzed where the money goes. And we analyzed how that money is spent compared to similar sized districts, right? When you think about a maintenance budget, it's not really accurate to compare us to a really small school district or to a Houston ISD. You've got to look at, similar peers. And what we find is that of the available money that we have as a school district to spend outside of what our salaries and benefits for staff, teachers and staff, that of that pie that's remaining, 30% of that currently goes to maintenance of our buildings. Now, 30% of that entire pie that's left over is well above the average for our peer districts. And that's directly related to the fact that we have older infrastructure. We have, people can imagine their house, I've lived in older homes before. Things just go wrong more often. When you have 15 buildings that are campuses that have anywhere from 500 to 1,200 students running through them on a daily basis over the course of 50, 60, 70 years, things start to go wrong.
Right.
And so we have that aging infrastructure, which drives up our costs. It's not that we're not spending part of our maintenance budget or even a higher percentage than the average school district. It's just that we have aging infrastructure.
You're trying to keep an old clunker car running down the road in some cases, as opposed to a vehicle that's under warranty that all you're doing is changing the oil. Your maintenance dollar goes further on a newer building than it does on an older structure.
That's partially right. It's not that we're trying to keep one clunker. We're trying to keep 15.
Right. Well, I remember being in the early
BISD used cars.
In the earliest task force meetings, I remember comparing on a slide that you put up, Dr. Shepard, of districts that were roughly at the 14,000 student mark that we had. And at that time, we had was it maybe one fewer junior high, but like 2 or 3 more elementary schools? If I remember, it was uncanny how these unrelated, there was no common denominator except number of total students, that they all had 6 elementaries, 2 junior highs, 2 high schools. I mean, just straight across the board. And we had older buildings and a few extra buildings that, you start talking about, well, if it's $500,000 to maintain this and $500,000 to maintain, next thing you know, it's several $1 million that are just gone every year.
Well, and I think what Greg brought up is an interesting perspective, because it's hard to wrap your head around that. You drive by a school for the first time in 10 years and you go, gee, that place is falling apart. But then you realize when you've got 1,200 kids running through that school every day, flushing toilets, turning on water, knocking lights, slamming doors. I mean, the things that, 2 kids in a house over a number of years, that's when it takes a minute to wrap your head around that and realize how much that amplifies the wear and tear. Because it is hard to grasp. And if you just drive by a school for the first time in 10 years and see, a window kind of not working properly or something, you don't understand
are so
that.
romantic. I mean, they get passionate about, I went to Patty Wilder, my mama went to Patty Wilder. There ain't nothing wrong with Patty Wilder. I'm like, dude, it's 100. It was old when I was in junior high 50 years ago. I can remember going to PW and going, man, I'm glad I'm at Hal. Wow, look at this.
Maybe I was just different. I liked school, but I was never that attached to my schools.
No, but I mean, Hal, I don't know do either of you know what year was Hal built, completed? 75? No.
We actually on the sheet.
Don't send me to the notes.
1970.
Okay, so see, I was there. I went to high school in 77, so I was there like 76, 5, and 4. So when I got to Hal, it had that familiar junior high smell that it still has. But when you walked in, it was like, wow, what a light, airy, knew the blockers were still purple and we still used them. And you walk around and then all of a sudden we would go to a basketball game over at Crane. And I liked Crane. I'd walk into that gym and go, wow, this is a real gym because it was big and permanent. The floor was a really dark wood. It was a beautiful gym. It may still be, but it was a beautiful place. And then we'd go over to PW and I'd be scared. I had great friends that I played Little League with and guys you've heard of, Ronnie Thomas, these great athletes. And but you'd go in there and there'd be a bent rim and there were just people that were just random people sitting in the gym. And you start looking around and you're intimidated. It was a great place to play ball. But I remember then saying, man, this place is old. And Brother Gary was only 50 years old then. And he was still teaching there. Hey, how are you, son? Good to see you. Good to see you. Hey, man, how you doing? He was already Brother Gary by then. That was 45 years ago. So trying to maintain these places, I've never been romantic about that. I look at Mitchell, I could bulldoze Mitchell tomorrow and say, thanks for your service. Take care. I might pull the hardwoods out of it. But other than that, I would just demolish what's left of Mitchell School over there. So I don't know.
So we're
bail me out, Ash.
Well, what's the total of this? And if we can break down and talk maybe a little bit more about the particulars of the bond and what it's going to mean to the taxpayers. How does it translate to my property taxes every month or every year?
Certainly. So for those task force recommendations that I described, the Stroman, the rebuild of the new campus, Mission Valley, the repairs district-wide, and the playgrounds, you're looking at $156.8 million as a part of that bond recommendation. How that translates to the taxpayer is on our interest and sinking side of the tax rate. We have 2 sides of our tax rate. So on the side that allows us to do work for repairs, for renovations, or for building new schools, that's going to increase if this moves forward by 7.5 cents.
Mm-hmm.
What that means in actual cost is for every $100,000 of property value, an increase of $6.25 per month or $75 per year. So if you think forward, okay, $100,000 is $75 a year, $200,000 home is going to be $150 a year. When we look at the average value, the County Appraisal District has given us our average home value at $168,000, slightly over $168,000, and so that would be $10.50 per month for the average home value.
There's one group of taxpayers, I think it's really important to point out, there's one group of taxpayers that this doesn't impact, and that's seniors, of course. Anyone over age 65, senior homestead exemption. So this tax increase that we're talking about does not impact them.
That's a big deal. And I remember that being a big deal when we were on the task force, is that it's interesting. The older folks are the ones that see the value and see the need, and yet, and rightfully so, they're exempted from the tax. They're the ones you want to target with the Education Foundation because many of them want to participate. They want to be a part of helping our students. But so if you've got, it's $6.25 a month, times per 100,000, you got a $250,000 house. It's $156 a year. That's all. That's all that's all you're looking at, right? Let's see. Yeah.
So 150 at 200,000. So you'd be looking at 225 at a 250.
There you go. Per year.
For the year.
I mean, I'm not trying to be flippant. It's just not that much money to just don't have that extra Starbucks once a week. Once a week, don't have a Starbucks and the problem goes away. I don't know. Or go make some more money.
Starbucks you're going to, but even once a month.
Right. No, I agree. I agree. So there you
Adam
go.
Daughtry asked, instead of raising property taxes, are there other ways to bring these funds to accomplish this?
Great question. And so I really think it's important that we do all we can to educate our community about how public schools in Texas are funded. So we have these two sides to our tax rate, maintenance and operations, and that's everything daily, from teacher salaries, keeping the lights on, running the school buses, feeding kids, all those things that a school district does is part of your maintenance and operations side of your tax rate. Then you have the second side, that debt service. That's the side that has to be used by public schools for anything. So you can renovate or build new options, but the only way to fund those things is from that.
I don't know how tongue in cheek it is. We got a question. It says, can we get a written contract from VISD not to raise taxes for the next 10 years if this bond passes? I love that question. In the big picture, that's kind of what they're looking at.
Let me tell you why I love that question, because my charge to the task force, which I'll be honest, when I gave this charge to the task force, I honestly thought it might have been too much. Because what I asked them for is not just a short-term plan with a potential bond, proposal, but also a midterm and a long-term view. Because I'd heard that on listening, learning to it as well. That folks wanted a 10-year view of like what's coming next. Be very clear about how this works for us and don't catch us off guard and that sort of thing. So I charged them with short-term and midterm. And part of the recommendation is for a midterm project that won't cost the taxpayers anything in 5 years.
And what project would that be, or has that been identified?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in there. So part of the task force work was, let's look at midterm. When we went through that prioritization process for campus needs and what campuses might make sense to consider for rebuild, Shields Elementary rose up among those campuses. And so Shields is the campus that the task force has recommended be prioritized for rebuild in 5 years. In working with our district's financial advisors, the task force recognized that should this bond election move forward and be successful, in 5 years, it's estimated we would have capacity to rebuild Shields with a bond that did not increase the tax rate at that time.
There you go. There are people that have that feeling of where's the P? Where's the P? Oh, this didn't cost you anything. But I do get it that if you're already having that expenditure come out, people will never, I have a hard time grasping, but folks in general will never grasp that it will never be done. We're a city. We're constantly moving forward. There will always be need. There will always be debt. Debt is the instrument that if you don't have a bake sale and save money to build a school. Nobody builds a school with cash. Everybody builds a school with a bond offering. So you've got to find a way to be,
Can I speak to the
please?
The key thing, because I think that's a great analogy. I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're right. I think some people do think that money's moving around and there must be something shady going on. One of the things that I've committed to, and I've spoken to the board about this a little bit, is if the bond is called and if it's successful in May, one of the things that I'd like to do in the era of radical transparency is to set up a community group, again, a task force of sorts, if you will, that we would call the Bond Oversight Committee. And I think that it would be really important for our community to say, these are folks, citizens who have a vested interest in making sure that these bond funds are being spent in the way that we've talked about, and that they're being thoughtful about debt strategies and what have you, and establish this bond oversight committee that can then essentially give an audit report of sorts to the board and say, yeah, the money's going where it's supposed to be, and it's being spent the way that we promised our community.
Because that brings up a good point, because I think the 2000 bond, there were some things that were promised in that bond that never got built. And I think that's still left a bad taste in folks who've been around that long. in their mouths because they were promised things that they voted for, and we never saw those materialize.
And the reality is you won't have to hold us accountable for where that money goes if we all take collective responsibility for every step of this process.
So with the projects on here, let's say all of a sudden construction costs skyrocket. How do you then reprioritize? Because that could be the perception again. Well, they promised us 10 projects and we only got 8. Then where do those other 2 projects get funded from? Because this bond no longer was able to satisfy that.
This recommendation actually takes some of that into account. We've talked about escalated construction costs and that whole thing, because obviously if a bond passes in May, it's not like we're breaking ground in June.
Right.
It's a several month, several year process for some of the projects. So we've built all of that in. There will be no reason for us to come back and say, oh, we undervalued this. We did ask.
You know, if you were really confident, you could just go out and have a groundbreaking, like say in April. You know, just jump in there and say, hey, we're moving forward. With or without you. Good question here says, what is planned for the future to more effectively address maintenance and operations to prevent what got things to this point? Hey, if we can all come together and say that it was systemic neglect. Well, we had older structures, so we had to spend more money on them, and it spirals downward because you have to make cuts and, well, let's repair that instead of replace it because of money constraints. How do you, with these buildings like you've got at East and West and Cade, which on the surface seem to be really doing great. I've heard they had AC problems a while back, but how do you move forward with a program that says, we're not going to have. We're not going to get to this. We're not going to be back here.
Greg, how many pages is the facilities assessment into town if you were to print it out?
Several thousand.
It's well over 1,000.
Yeah.
I think it's several thousand. I haven't counted that.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And my point, I want Greg to have a chance to answer this too, is my point is that facilities assessment allows us to lay down a really clear plan for the next 10 years, because we have inch by inch what the needs are at these various facilities.
You just start like Dave Ramsey with the cheapest one and just fix it, work your way up.
Actually, a part of this assessment comes with a tool for our maintenance department to be able to identify all the things that were identified through the assessment, what happens to be addressed by a bond potentially, and then all the things that would remain, because by no means does this recommendation touch on all that was a part of identifying needs from the facility assessment. So we're able to go in and check off, yes, this has been addressed. This has been addressed through our regular maintenance and operations. But I also want to add that I think sometimes the public school finance is really complicated to start with, okay? And it changes every 2 years oftentimes. But I think sometimes there's the assumption that the way that the state funds local public school districts includes an amount that's expected to do major repairs and major renovations within your maintenance and operations budget. It wouldn't be surprising if most people don't know that because education is such a people-heavy industry, we're taking care of kids, you have to have eyes on kids and serve kids and all different types of needs, that approximately 80% of all maintenance and operations budget each year is for staff pay and salaries. And you know, Brent, as being a part of the first task force, that we're working at the same time that we're looking at addressing our facilities and addressing our competitiveness to attract and retain talent through competitive pay.
Which can be done through a bond, correct? Because I think people have that misperception.
Yeah, no, you can't just have a bond. People say that all the time. If there's a way to raise teacher pay, I'll vote for that bond. Let me tell you though, I can remember cutting up with Dr. Bob Jacklich and just being glib, like I cut up with y'all when we're not being serious. And I said to him, I said, they had given a $1,500 stipend or bonus is the way I looked at it to everybody at VISD basically. And I said, oh man, you're all, button up your shirt, your heart's going to fall out, $1,500. And he goes, it's funny you say that. He goes, you say that because you know that $1,500 doesn't go a long way these days. He goes, but every time we say, here's $1,500, he goes, it costs the district $3 million. He said, so you have to look at, it's one thing to say, here's $10, you extrapolate that over 2,000 people. People don't necessarily, they're in tune with their school. They know their principal, their assistant, their 26 teachers. and they're not in tune with the behemoth that is the machine that has to educate 14,000 kids, all the buses, all the miles, brakes, tires, endless maintenance, fuel, no doubt. So,
and I think it is important that the taxpayer know that the way the state has set up public education funding is for the lion's share of those major repairs, renovations, rebuilds to be done through the INS tax rate. And when you evaluate Victoria ISD's debt compared to the average school district in our region and the average school district across the state, we're less than half. So we don't carry a high level of debt compared to school districts. In fact, we're less than 50%.
And that translates into why our tax rates are where they are. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
Well, and that was a question we had here. Pass the bond and then watch our property values go up to generate more.
that's a misconception. I mean, the school district doesn't control the CAD.
That's actually, thank you for pointing that out. You know,
Right.
we get that information at the end of July, just like everybody else.
Sure.
Where our property values.
I mean, you guys own homes. You know what happens to your, I mean, you know, you dispute your value just like everybody else. I mean, it's like, come on, it's not like it's a collusive effort between VISD and the CAD. Nobody controls the CAD. We've all seen that through the years. So go ahead, feel free to.
I forgot what I was about.
No,
to
you-
say about tax rates.
Tax rates. Yeah, we do that to
Oh,
people. Don't feel
comparative,
bad.
yes. Well, you know, through the 16-month journey of the task force, we were getting feedback from our task force members. They were going out and talking to people in their social circles. And we were getting feedback because our news media or radio, TV station, newspaper, they all did a great job of helping share that we have this work going on. Part of what we heard back is, hey guys, our tax rates are higher than they've ever been. And so I see you're looking at that one sheet or information sheet there. You know, it actually shows that our total tax rate currently is the lowest it's been since 1992. Hasn't been lower in almost 30 years. And it's well below the average for our region and below the average for similar sized school districts. And even with a successful bond of 7.5 cents, it'll still be below average for our peer districts and right in line with our average district in the region.
I have a question from a
100%.
listener. How often do other districts have bonds? Are we unusual or the norm in how many bonds we have and how often?
You know, I haven't done a study on that to say for the average school district. I can tell you that our last successful bond was in 2007, which was 14 years ago. The one prior to that was 1990, I believe. So I would say I don't have data to support it. And I got to tell you, I love to have data to support it.
When we go back to that 07 bond, you know, it's not fair. You know, people, I haven't even heard the naysayers say, oh, this is woefully inadequate or anything. There were, I think at both high schools, there was like the idea of an extra gym or there was a bigger locker room. There were some things that didn't get in because of constraints that had to be made. But in general, and with you guys having nothing to do with it, so it's not like a attaboy or a put down, those schools have served us well. I think East and West High School have been adaptable. People have adjusted to them. And Cade, by all accounts, is a very nice middle school. You know, I know that the building costs right now are through the roof, but there's no reason to think they're going to go down.
Yeah, you know, you bring up with that, I think you bring up what for me is the elephant in the room. You know, we're running an exchange right now. Greg and I talked to about 150 people in the last 3 days about this bond. And if there's one thing that we've heard in several groups, and I see it a lot on the exchange online, it's why now? Why now?
Right.
We're just coming out of a pandemic and folks are struggling. And I just want to take a moment and honor that because I recognize that and the school board recognizes that. We get that this is a pretty tough time, but we try to weigh that with what you just said, that we know that construction costs are going to escalate. We know that our buildings are going to continue to get older. There's no reason to think that they're not. And furthermore, when you look at where the interest rates are right now, they're at historically low rates. And they only have one place to go, frankly, and that's up. And so the cost of waiting it's going to cost us more. The buildings will be older and we'll get less value for what we're trying to do.
I totally agree because if you look at it from if all we're arguing about is the dollar amount that we take, the idea that interest rates are basically on the floor.
Yeah.
So if if a 2x4 costs you $1 more now than it used to, that's okay because over 20 years you're not paying but 2% interest on it. I mean, it's better than buying it for $1.50 less and paying 5% interest. So I do agree with that, and I don't know. We're going to run out of time, which means that you guys need to come back.
Well, we got more questions, I think, that we want to get to. What was the annual cost per $100,000 of appraised property value on the failed bond from 17 compared to this proposed bond? Do we know where that was?
I don't know.
My excuse is I wasn't here.
Right. Was there any discussion by the task force to repair, update, et cetera, the sports venues, particularly Patty Welder Stadium and Memorial? Patty Welder's in terrible shape. My recollection is these things were included in the last bond that failed. I fully realize education facilities come first. Things have changed since that last bond, haven't they?
Well, it's largely due to what you just said right there at the end, which was this task force, and what we heard from the community was, we want you to focus on the campuses first. We all recognize, we go to games at Patty Welder Stadium, Memorial Stadium. There are needs that exist there right now.
Right.
But we also recognize that we have limited resources, and we want to make sure we're addressing our campus needs and our classroom needs first. So by all means, the task force recognizes that there's future improvements that need to happen in other facilities, but this was what they came to consensus on to address now.
And furthermore, there was a change in state law that happened very recently that says if we are going to do athletic facilities, standalone athletic facilities, that they have to be called as a separate item on a bond election.
Is that the idea that, in theory, to protect the taxpayer, that you can't slide in a $10 million? If you're Katy and you're going to build 4 high schools, oh wow, where did they get this $10 million for this baseball field? Oh, it was in that last bond offering. It kind of takes the pork. We always complain about the pork at the federal level. The state is kind of taking the pork, if you will, out of, if it's academic, it's academic. If it's athletic, it's athletic. So I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I would love to see Ash Wade Stadium. I would love to see a corporate entity come in. Are there partnerships to be forged with corporate America, and do they make sense to be pursued at the individual district level?
So you mean like Frost Bank Field?
Right, yes.
Yes. As a matter of fact.
It's brilliant.
And we're currently trying to chase some other opportunities as well for some of our athletics facilities.
This probably is not bond related, but we've got a question about William Wood Elementary School and the future of that school, because it's been open, closed. I think now it's closed, correct? Is there any what's the future for William Wood?
Yeah, the future for William Wood, if you're asking just the Quentin Shepherd version of this, and we haven't vetted this through a task force or anything else.
If we want the real details, we'll call Dr. Bonewell.
Absolutely. But, and this is something, let me just say up front, we would absolutely take this through a task force because it's complex. There's not one right answer. Anytime we have complex issues where there's more than one right answer, we form a task force and have a conversation. In my mind's eye, we've had such tremendous success at high school by looking at the P-TECH model. And the P-TECH is essentially a school within a school model. So we've deployed one P-TECH this year is in healthcare, meaning a student who enters as a freshman is in a healthcare track and earning college credits throughout their high school experience as they get their core classes. So think English is focused on healthcare, math focused on healthcare, science focused on healthcare. When they graduate with an associate's degree in hand and industry certifications ready to go to work. That was the one we deployed this year. I knew we were on the right track when last year we did a recruitment effort and we had about 30 spots available. We had over 300 people show up to be a part of this program. And so we deployed that one. This year we're kicking off a STEM P-TECH, and we're going to kick off an education P-TECH. We've got that one queued up. We're looking at computer science and cybersecurity as a P-TECH. And I say all of that so I can say this. In our community, I recognize that we have a rural and agrarian sort of population to some degree. I was born and raised on a farm. It has a special place in my heart. I can foresee, since we already have a partnership with UT, we could reach out to A&M, for instance. And wouldn't it be cool if we had a P-TECH high school at that campus, William Wood, where the kids could actually have livestock right there on property. They could do crop science right there on property. They could learn genetics. They could get their science or math or whatever. For those kids that are like, yeah, I want to be a farmer. I want to be in this rural agrarian environment. Let's give them a hyper focus and graduate with a degree and a head start. That's a win.
Somebody asked, is that property going back to the family that donated it?
Not at this time. If the school, the way the agreement reads, and I beg your pardon, it's been a couple of years since I looked at it, but the way the agreement reads, it says that if at such time that it would not remain a school, that it would revert back to the Wood family. It can't be, we can't sell it. Is what it boils down to.
Right. So if I'm hearing you right, if I'm in the P-TECH and I'm a young person that wants to go into nursing, I can come out of high school with an associate's degree in healthcare and potentially get accepted into a nursing program or continue that track with a major leg up. And when you talk about the farming, I think about the kid, Ash, that he learns about I was fascinated when I lived in the Valley by the GPS tractors and by the idea that Helena could go out there and mobile do little cores and test your soil and then custom design that 100 acres over there needs more nitrogen. And while you're having hoppers that do fertilizing, when you get to that section, it automatically adjusts and gives it the right oomph that the soil needs. That's fascinating stuff that a kid could learn at the high school level. It's science. It's a beautiful concept.
Well, it bumps up against my passion, and I know we're getting close to the hour here, but I do want to say this. My first year here, as I sat at graduation, I watched all the kids walk across the stage. This thought crossed my mind. All of these kids, all of them that walked across the stage, are walking across the stage with a diploma. But what are they going to do on Monday morning, right? And it occurred to me the way that you make this conversation simple for our community while still complicated in the work that we do is to ensure that every single student graduates with an and. High school diploma and military recruitment letter, or high school diploma and industry certifications, or high school diploma and a path to college acceptance and what comes next. I'm not going to rest until we get to 100% of our kids that graduate with an and as they walk across that.
Well, and that's, I guess, kind of the other elephant in the room, other than why now, but how does this bond increase and improve our learning outcomes? Because those haven't been where they've needed to be in recent years.
Yeah, historically, I wouldn't argue that point, but we've seen phenomenal success. We have more kids taking AP courses than we've ever had. And it's not just that they're taking the courses, they're scoring better. Our scores are improving year over year. We have more kids taking dual credit classes than we've ever had at both schools year over year, and those scores are improving as well. We have more kids doing on-ramps. We hadn't done on-ramps before. This is a different program that allows kids to get not just dual credit, but dual enrollment opportunities. Again, more kids doing that as well. So our graduation rates are up. We're higher than the state by every measured area. We outperform the state by 15% when it comes to our homeless students who graduate high school. So it's not like we're just kicking the kids out and the scores are going up. We're actually keeping more kids and they're doing better. More kids learning more.
You see how excited he
I get
gets?
excited.
No, but I'll tell you
what.
what. So watch. This is, and it is Wade and Carson. Hang on one second. You know what? It reminds me of Jerry Jones. We got the Troy Aikman. We got the Michael Irvins. He added letters to people's things. We got the Michael Irvins. We got the Emmitt Smiths. We're good. But how about them Cowboys? That is what I'm feeling. I got to chill here, man. And if you can get excited, and by the way, that's what you need. You need that at the highest levels of education, especially the public system, where at best it's 50-50. There's negativity. People are always upset about something. I want to be the guy, and I think I do speak for our listeners. You're both terrific gentlemen. I think you're doing yeoman's work. I couldn't be any more proud than to be a part of it. I just want to make sure that we can take that task force mentality, and through them listening to you, listen to your teachers, we can extrapolate that attitude across the district to where people say, yeah, my taxes went up, but have you seen the kids that are coming out of that STEM school at Stroman? That is unbelievable. And they're going straight to college, and they're ready to go. And right. And Victoria, by the way, folks, you want solid economic development, you develop a school district that people want their kids in. You don't believe me? Go right out there to industrial, where perception is reality. Perception is reality that industrial is such a superior school district. They're building houses out the wazoo out there. Their taxes are through the roof. And guess what? People are moving from here to there, and all of a sudden their kids are smarter. Negative. Kids are still right here just as smart. Why? Poor kids are just as smart as white kids, is what Joe Biden would say. Let's all get together right here. Make Victoria ISD the magnet that it ought to be for this community.
And for the state.
and roll on. There you go.
Gentlemen, thank you very much
Hey,
for stopping by this
Thanks
morning.
for being here. And can we count on you, no matter what the school board decides, can we count on you to come back?
Because the vote's next week, isn't it? The board putting this to a vote next
next
week?
Tuesday.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So I have a feeling, I don't think in general, Dr. Sherwood, do you always attend the school board meeting, or is it sometimes better if you're just not there?
I'm required to be.
Yeah, he'll be there, but I have a feeling he'll have on something with some epaulets, and like, boom, 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 he'll stroll into that meeting like, yeah. Making lots of eye contact.
Saber on his hip.
Yeah, right.
That would be
Lots of eye, yes, sir. Hey, thank you
Thanks,
both
guys.
very much.
Appreciate it.
And if there's anything you want to follow up with us later, if there's any data that you feel like you want shared, please do. We'll put it on the website or whatever. So
Excellent.
thank you a ton. If you want to go back to the green room, have another martini, we'll be there in a minute.
We want to thank our sponsors. Sometimes these shows, I think the importance of these shows maybe transcend a little bit of our breaks and keeping the conversation going. So,
and let's just tomorrow.
Yeah.
How about folks? Tomorrow we'll spend a little extra time loving on our sponsors, but they are spectacular. And when I look at this list of folks, I see people that I know have had kids go through our public schools, as have Ash and I both. So,
and others who paid the taxes but chose not to send their kids to public schools, but still paid the taxes and need to be represented as well.
Absolutely. So you guys have a great day. Stay tuned. Tomorrow we'll get some sports trivia from Brother Gary, but we feel like this was an important hour. We wanted to share it with you, and let's talk about this as an ongoing deal. Stay tuned for the Hall of Famer Ralph Salazar will be in here